Are we live streaming? Okay. Thank you. So I'd like us to recommence our meeting. We're now moving on to item 6, where I would like to welcome Mr. James Wilcox, who is the Director of Predator Free New Zealand. We're actually very fortunate that he is a local resident and he has done an amazing amount of work in Wellington, and so be really interesting to hear him talk about the work that he has done in Wellington and how it can be transferred into our district here with our, I suppose, with our pest problem. So thank you very much, James. Over to you.
Kia ora Council, ki te whare tūnei, tēnā koe, ki te whānau e hui hui nei tēnā koutou, ko maunga kakaramea te maunga, ko tarawera te awa, ko mokai haha te ngāhere, no Rotorua hau, ko taku ingoa, ko James Wilcox. E mahi ana ahau ki Predator Free Pōneke, e roti te wāhanga, kai whakahaere mātua, ki te tinokoa, tuku ngākau, no reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Kia ora everyone, and thank you for having me along today. So, as Jocelyn mentioned, my name is James. I'm the project director for a wee project called Predator Free Wellington. I actually hail from the land of steam and geysers about 5 hours north, up in Rotorua, where I started to ply my trade in conservation about 22 years ago, working for the department, and then have been moonlighting as a Flash Wellington boy for about 10 years before making the move up the coast. So I wouldn't say that I'm an expert on all things kapiti. We've spent a bit of time between Raumati and Wellington over the last few years and recently moved up to Te Horo and absolutely loving it. And in some ways this kind of predator-free kaupapa has followed me a little bit up the coast despite lots of attempts to bat it away. So I will tell you a little bit about our journey in terms of Wellington, where we started and how we've progressed, because it's actually the how we work which is probably more important than what we've achieved. And then I will try and land that with relating it to some very, very early thoughts on you know what might resonate here up on the coast. And just to reiterate again, I'm no expert on all things coast. There's a couple of gentlemen down the back there who have been working in this space for a long time up here in kapiti and doing some amazing things. So they're probably who you really need to talk to. So just to put our project in perspective, so that green area that you can see on your screens there is the total predator-free Wellington project area. And we're currently, our first phase was Te Motukairangi, the Miramar Peninsula, where 20,000 Wellingtonians call home. And now we're moving through into the CBD. So our goal as a project is to remove every single rat, every single stoat, every single possum, and every single weasel, and hold that at zero in perpetuity. Why are we doing that? A little known fact about Aotearoa is that we are actually at the top of the list in terms of threatened and endangered species in the world, right? We've got something like 4,000 threatened and endangered species. So we had a decision to make. Were we going to let these things that exist nowhere else in the world continue to slip off the face of the planet, or were we going to do something about it? And we chose the latter. We are part of a national mission to eliminate rat, stoats, possums and weasels by 2050 across the whole of the motu, across the whole of Aotearoa. And our particular challenge as part of that, this was announced in John Key's government back in 2017, is to figure out, can we do this in urban spaces, right? We're good at it in terms of our offshore islands, our forested landscapes, but no one had ever done it before in the urban context. So that's our role. And so when we started this journey, we figured out pretty damn quickly that the only way it was going to work is if we had 100% buy-in from the community. And that's not just the permissions, that is leadership, it's enablement. It has to become part of the DNA of our city in Wellington, right? To do the job on Miramar Peninsula, we needed over 3,000 individual permissions. So that's not having one or two public meetings and getting a mandate. That is door knocking and building thousands and thousands of relationships. And so that's exactly what we did. That picture there I absolutely love, because that takes me back 5 years ago. That was the very first permission we obtained to do our work on Miramar Peninsula. Where we are now in the CBD, we've needed 10,000 individual permissions. So it just gives you an insight into the level of relationship, of trust, of mana that we have to hold in the community to get this work done. When we seek permissions, what we're saying is, can we put a lethal device That's going to be a bait station loaded full of toxin called brodifacoum, or a massive trap in a box that's about 1 metre long in somebody's home, somebody's school, somebody's business. And the kicker is then saying, can we come back and service that device every week until the job's done? So the trust is absolutely huge. And as a result of that, what we've been able to achieve is quite phenomenal in terms of social outcomes. We've had to adapt with our community. So one example is probably Strathmore Park. It's the highest socioeconomic deprivation schools in our city. And we went in there with our glossy 2-pager to talk about all the fantastic birds that were going to come back as a result of our work. And what we got was, that's really cool, bro, but we're struggling to put a feed on the table and a roof over our family's heads. So how is this relevant to us? So we completely pivoted and said, well, what's top of mind in your community? And what we got was, we can't sleep at night because we've got rats crawling around in the hot water cupboard. And so that was our win in those particular communities. The other point to note, as a result of this work, there's 3,000 permissions. We work in the same density everywhere. We run about 11 lethal devices per hectare, so that's 11 traps and bait stations in the area the size of a rugby field. You map most conservation projects, they will be in the leafy green, affluent suburbs. For us, we work in the same densities everywhere, so we've achieved equity, which is quite profound. That's an insight into what an eradication grid looks like. So every one of those dots is not just a lethal device, a trap, a bait station, or a camera, which we use to monitor post-eradication to determine that nothing's there. It is also a relationship that we've had to build, every single one of those. So we have quite a powerful medium within which we can distribute messages out to the public, connect people, get them buying into a broader vision that's greater than the self. And we're seeing a massive, massive appetite for people to want to get involved with us. So we have hundreds and hundreds of volunteers across every single demographic that are contributing to this mission. We are very, very different, right? This is not the same as traditional control, which has been our approach to mainland conservation up until this point. So control is needing to maybe do a toxin drop or continuous efforts, and that cost profile goes on in perpetuity. This is about front-loading the cost, getting the job done, and then holding it at zero, freeing up that resource to then address other ecological challenges. And this is an example of that element of taking us into crazy places. So this is a guy called Daryl who lives in Strathmore Park in Wellington, and that's actually the title shot of a documentary that was made about Daryl. So Daryl spent a lot of his life on the wrong side of the train tracks, spent 5 years inside in prison for some crimes, and got out, cleaned up his act. He came along and got on board with our project because he couldn't sleep at night. He caught 27 rats in his hot water cupboard, his pantry, over 2 weeks. He then got us access to the Black Power gang pad. He got us access to the marginalised communities of Strathmore. A guy like Daryl is worth 10 times as much as someone with 2 ecology PhDs in a project like mine. The point being that there is a space for everyone in this project, and you can generate some pretty powerful social outcomes as part of it. And there's a role for everyday Wellingtonians, as there would be for everyone if we were able to scale and roll this out across the country. So that was Miramar. So we successfully eliminated all of our target species. Possums were eliminated by Regional Council in the early 2000s. We eliminated ship rats, Norway rats, weasels and stoats off Miramar in November last year. It took us about 5 times as long as we thought and cost about 10 times as much. But this has never been done before in the world, right? And this was our job, was to create a pathway, was to find, could we actually do that? And now we're refining our methods. It's costing us 75% less per hectare to eliminate than it was on Miramar. And now we're moving into the CBD. So those of you that know Wellington well, we've come off Miramar Peninsula. We've already moved through Kilburnie, Rongotai and Lyell Bay, and now we're coming up into Mount Victoria. You can see on the left there, those are the 10,000 individual permissions that we've needed, and then the shadow part is just the green space in the city. That's the Mount Victoria Greenbelt. And so we've already got permissions there from Wellington City Council. As part of that process, our model was really one of remove and protect. So that other image there is our virtual buffer and barrier system. So that's designed to stop anything coming back into our active project area. And that is entirely managed, entirely led by volunteers. So we've got over 200 volunteers throughout that system, maintaining a network of 1,000 bait stations and traps giving up their own time every single week to do that job and reporting in. So it's become pretty massive. Also moving off Miramar, Miramar was difficult enough, 20,000 people, a mixture of socioeconomic factors, different cultures, commerce, all of those sorts of things. And our difficulty profile has increased about 100-fold, because you think of phase 2, we've got our regional hospital with thousands of vehicle movements every day. We've got our zoo, so we're going to have to put our staff into the tiger enclosure and get rid of rats out of there. We've got government house with all the security provisions. But the city's up for it, all right? And we are moving at pace. So this thing can be done. And myself and my team, we are so used to being told things can't be done. And the reality is they can be done. You get a committed mass of people determined to deliver on something, and you can pretty much do anything you want. And that's exactly what we're seeing in the city, which is very, very impressive. I should note as well, if I just back right up to the start, I tend to launch into these things quite quickly, as evidenced by what I've just said. We're a charity. Our foundation partners are Wellington City Council, Greater Wellington Regional Council, and a philanthropic organisation called the Next Foundation. We're also supported with funding from PF 2050 Limited, who was the company set up by government to fund landscape scale projects seeking elimination to deliver on that national goal. So I report into a board of directors. We've got shareholders from Wellington City Council, Greater Wellington Regional Council. We have an independent chair. We have mana whenua at that table. And then we have a representative from the Next Foundation as well. So we run a company structure, but we are a charity. We are also a charity that is very, very data heavy, right? This is again something that is different about how we work. When you're operating in a peopled landscape and at some point in time you're going to stick your hand up and say, we've got to zero, you need to be very, very, very sure, because it would just be very easy for someone the next day to say, I've found a rat, and then our mana, our reputation is shot. So that map on the left there, you can see we have a data team. We have a team of analysts that are continuously streaming about 12 different sets of data. So that is catches, that is confirmed bait take or possible bait take. It is our cameras, it is chew cards, it is whack tags, it is public sightings, it is evidence of rats chewing on seeds or anything like that. We are continuously streaming that data, and that helps us decide where we put our effort, where we can switch things off, and where we can hold them. So what you're seeing there is basically the suburb of Hataitai. All the yellow dots are devices that we've serviced. The dark blue ones are confirmed bait takes, and the red letters are where we've got animals and traps. So we've pretty much cleared out the majority of Hataitai, and we're just having a bit of an issue with Evans Bay around that parade there. We're experimenting some new techniques to try and work at the top of the escarpments there and below, because if we start having to close down roads, that becomes very, very expensive very quickly, and it starts to become a public nuisance very, very quickly as well. So it's going pretty well. You can see our progress there. The green area off Miramar is where we've already cleared and is in a zero state. So we've switched that over to biosecurity. So biosecurity for us is perpetual vigilance. So that is where we turn it over to cameras. We work on a density of cameras, 1 per hectare, 1 in the area of a rugby field. So currently on Miramar we have 504 cameras, and those are serviced every 2 to 3 weeks, because if something turns up, and it will from time to time, then we need to know about it as soon as possible. Moved up into Hataitai, and then we're coming around Evans Bay, and then we'll head south. That's a little bit more detail around our remove and protect model. So that's our virtual barrier system, lines of traps at every 10 metres, lines of bait stations at every 50 metres, and then a whole kind of what we'd refer to as a dead man zone. So an area that's a buffer, effectively we've eradicated it, and that just sits there and is really a lot tougher for rats in particular to recolonise into an area. So that's some of the science and tech behind what we do. And the image on the left there just shows you the density of our cameras out there on Miramar. Getting to zero was really, really tough, and it's actually not the hardest challenge. The hardest challenge is keeping it at zero. So our organisation has now moved into service provision, and what that means is we want to be better than your telco, we want to be better than your internet company. So if a member of the public gets hold of us on 0800 No Rats, we will respond within 12 hours, and that helps build confidence in our system, because You ring us up and say, I've got some scratching in the ceiling, our team's there within 12 hours, you're going to tell two of your mates who'll tell two of your mates, and pretty soon you've got real confidence in the system. And it's working. You know, we get 10 to 20 calls a week, and 99% of those are mice, they're not rats, or they're people confusing weta droppings with rat droppings. But the point is it's building confidence in our system and is actually demonstrating a viable exit strategy. And that's something we have not had in conservation, right? It's this perpetual kind of problem that we've got to continuously address. We're not able to step away and then move into other facets of work. So this is pretty cool. We also have our, obviously our social media channels, and this is just some of the feedback that we're getting from people. So you don't need to try and attempt to read that. It is just another engagement channel with people reporting on their findings, letting us know what they're seeing, and actually being really happy with the results. But that's really the key piece in all of this, is removing, protecting, and then being able to hold that, being able to defend. And then, of course, I should go in quickly into the ecological response on Miramar. So every year we run a monitoring mechanism which is called 5-minute bird counts, and that's set up on a standardised station so it doesn't change, no one can fudge the results, and it's done by a third-party expert contractor, because I need to be able to put my hand on heart and say, for this amount of spend, this is what you're getting, right? So they're independently auditable results. Native birds have increased on Miramar by 91% in 5 years. 91% more native birds, wholesale. We thought it was going to take 10 years to get any meaningful ecological response. Native tree weta have increased by 200%, and then indicator species like our waka waka, our fantail have increased by 500%. 500% in 5 years. Our rero rero, our beautiful little songbird, grey warbler, has increased by 275% in 5 years. So the evidence base is irrefutable, right? And the ecological response is absolutely incredible to see in such a short space of time. We've got kaka turning up on Miramar for the first time in who knows how long. And over those images on the left there, that top left one is of our native kakariki, our green-crowned parakeet. So that hasn't been seen on Miramar for well over 100 years, so starting to recolonise the peninsula. Those images are all taken off our cameras, you know, that detection network I mentioned. What we would typically see is rat, 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 no rat, no rat, and then we see korora, little blue penguins, or we see a kakariki, or we see something else, and that is absolutely phenomenal in terms of answering the why question, not only for ourselves, but for the communities that we work alongside too. So pretty phenomenal results. And then I thought I would move us from Wellington, from Miramar, from the CBD, and up to Kapiti and just share some thoughts. And again, excuse me, because I am very new to this part of the world, but I think there's considerable opportunities in this space as well, right? So predator-free Wellington is part of a national mission. Obviously, our success relies on whatever happens further north. And, you know, we're not sure where central government's sitting on supporting this mission separately from John Key's earlier government. But the national strategy looks like something like a patchwork quilt, right, where we leverage off areas that we've been able to successfully eliminate, and then we keep building and building. So the bottom of the North Island moving north actually looks like a pretty good rolling front in my mind. Also considering starting off with strengths. So I've got that photo of Kapiti Island. You know, in Wellington we had that focal point of Zealandia, and really our mission is to just enable safe passage for all of those birds that are thriving within the sanctuary. Up on the coast here, we're lucky enough to have Kapiti Island, and that's, you know, pretty much everyone has a relationship with that island, whether they've been there or not. It means something, and that's quite cool to have that beacon. Like Taranaki Maunga, it's the mountain there. Everyone living in Taranaki has a relationship with that mountain. We've also got Ngā Manu, and, you know, the spread of the native birds out of there as well. My impression is that there's great work already underway in terms of partnership. You've got some fantastic community groups that have been working in the space for quite a long period of time, and really it's about stitching all of that together, you know. At our heart, Predator-Free Wellington is a social movement, delivering conservation goals via elimination. First and foremost, it's a social movement. There's clearly a community desire. You take our wee village in Te Horo Beach. I batted away for 6 months, request to start up a predator-free Te Horo group, and ultimately, you kind of always know you're going to end up fronting these things, don't you? So we've got that underway, and our goal there is to get a trap in every second household. We've then got regional council on board and said, hey, how about you put some mustard lines along the K&E, along the coast there? So they've done that. And then we keep scaling out from there. So there's some really fantastic things happening here already, and clearly a community desire. That concept of defendability is just where my mind goes now. I look at the coast and think, well, on one side you've got the sea, that's a damn good barrier to have, and then on the other side you've got the Akatarawas, and those are pretty heavily trapped and pretty heavily treated with 1080 on a 2 or 3 yearly cycle. So those aren't bad barriers to have on the grander scheme of things. But there's also some realities around this stuff, right? Elimination is distinct from control is very, very expensive, right? There's no doubt about it. But it does break from our current approaches, which is a perpetual spend that needs to go on forever. So, for example, we have freed up Council's investment in Miramar Peninsula to respond to all of the 300 or so annual home phone calls saying that people have got problems with rats, the tens of thousands of dollars on spend on possum and rat control in the reserves, so forth and so on. It's not huge amounts of money at this stage, but it means that you can take that investment, refocus it on some other challenges, which is quite cool. Kapiti is also a big, big area, right? And so, you know, if there was appetite to go down this path, and that would be several steps away, then there's real opportunity to test some smaller areas and start to scale out. You know, you look at what's happening with Ngā Manu, other areas around the Waikanae estuary, those would be good places to start. And coordination is key, right? Hundreds of different groups doing individual things in individual areas is great, but actually having a backbone organisation that can coalesce around a central idea, help fill in the gaps, that enables far more impact to be delivered, and that single point of focus as well. And I think that has been a real strength for ourselves, and I'm not advocating for a predator-free 2.0 up here in Kapiti, by the way. We've got enough work in Wellington. But being unencumbered, right? We go in and we build relationships with people. We're not there to give out parking fines. We didn't increase the rates by X%, or whatever the case may be. People see us and they get, oh, you're here for rats and you're here for mustelids. And, you know, our ability to move unencumbered through the community is a real strength. And also what we're starting to see nationally is some of this work with single species focus. So some of the groups just going after possums, for example, was great. But possums are, you know, in our world, in an elimination sense, they are the easiest to get. So when we're focused on rats are the hardest to get, and by virtue of that fact, you'll pick up a number of other introduced predator species along the way, versus focusing on possums, then having to come back and do mustelids, then having to come back and do rats. So I would advocate for multi-species approaches as well. And the issue of introduced predators is becoming more profound. It's becoming more profound around the world. So rats are increasing in cities. We're seeing a similar thing in New Zealand. Whether that's related to global climate change or other human-induced factors, we're not sure, but it is a fact. On the coast here, we have had an absolute cracker season for mustelids. So mustelids are our weasels, stoats, and ferrets. You know, I've caught 3 ferrets and not a great deal of time on our property. We've seen stoats running around all over the place, and they are tough, and they are natural born killers, right? They have very high metabolisms. They basically need protein the whole time. So if there were a call made sometime in the future to get really serious around this, I think having a crack at rabbits would have to be on the cards. We don't have that same scale of problem in Wellington, but you look at the risk associated with the Kapiti Expressway, with Transmission Gully, and that's basically just a rabbit highway now. That's providing a constant food source. And we don't have ferrets in Wellington City yet, but they are creeping closer and closer. So I think without taking that on, it would be a bit of a misnomer to think that any meaningful attempts to eliminate mustelids could occur. And the other point, you know, again, being new to this area, this kind of work, mana whenua, is absolutely central. You know, they have to be part of the conversation right from the outset, and we were fortunate enough to have that in Wellington, and, you know, that would need to be a consideration for any work in the future. That photo there, I'll just end on that. You know, this is tough. It is really hard work, but that is a kakariki in the middle of Strathmore Park in Wellington, so that higher socioeconomic deprivation scores in the city. And we now have a generation of rangatahi growing up that know what kakariki are, that know what kaka are, that know what kereru are, because they are part of their everyday lives. They're not confined to offshore islands. They're not confined to protected sanctuaries. And that makes the hard work worthwhile, right? We think that's a pretty awesome investment in the future of our city and the future of its people and prosperity. So I'll leave that there and happy to take any questions.
So before I go to any questions, thank you so much. And
right.
it's amazing the work that you're doing. It really, really is. And hopefully we can move in the same direction somehow here on the Kapiti Coast. Councillor Coe.
Thanks, James. We've met before. I'm on the committee of the Friends of Te Horo Beach, who are helping to coordinate predator-free Te Horo, which is, or Te Horo Beach, I should say, which has taken off like a rocket. And look, there's just huge interest in the community in this area. And I'm just wondering what we need to do to coordinate it across the whole of Kapiti. I know there's a predator-free Waikanai group that's been set up. I think there's interest in Paraparaumu, I'm not sure. I know certainly in Te Horo, like we're just focusing on Te Horo Beach at the moment, but there's interest in the wider parts of Te Horo as well and doing something. There's just a massive appetite for it, but it seems to me it needs someone to put the time and effort into coordinating it and to, teaching people how to run the programs and work with the community. So what's the way forward to do this? And I guess also the other big thing is rabbits. How do we? Because we need Greater Wellington on board with that, and council and private landowners. So a couple of questions there for you.
Yeah, thank you, Liz. There's a lot on there. I think in Wellington we started with the backyard trapping. We view that in terms of a bit of some crass terminology as the gateway drug, because that was really the activator that got people involved and wanting to do more and more and more. And that commitment by people is absolutely astounding, that genuine desire to want to step up and participate. And now we have hundreds and hundreds of volunteers that are more highly trained than I was when I was a dock ranger. That's the reality. They're out doing analysis, they're identifying different fecals and all sorts of things like that. So that whole capability build that can come via the volunteer effort is huge, and then that can be deployed quite strategically. But it's also an interesting problem to have, right? When you've got such high levels of enthusiasm, and where do you go with that? And it needs to be carefully tempered, because you set everyone off at 100 miles an hour, and then there's not the resourcing or ability to activate. That can become quite dangerous. So, I would advocate strongly for backyard trapping in those areas, because that can be really resource light. It provides a lot of different opportunities for people to get involved. We can, in Wellington, we recycle timber all of the time and make trap boxes with 50 to 100 people, and can deploy those resources out. And then I think really, if there is desire to progress with this as a concept, then that idea of a backbone organisation, or someone that can coordinate the activities, and it might just be as simple as sitting down with a map of Kapiti and saying, what are we all doing in these different areas? And then, you get to see all of that, and then identify where the gaps are, and then coalesce around a vision. What would a vision be for this area? Would it be, looking at the full suite of predators, rats, mustelids and possums? And I think going from that space. But I would strongly advocate for someone who's in that role, or an organisation, to have that backbone role. It's got that singular focus. We haven't stopped running in 7 years, hey? Once this thing takes off, it's like a genie out of the bottle. It's all go.
So is that should be probably someone on a paid role doing that coordination?
I would say so. Yes.
And would you see council having a role in that? Or
I think so.
Council?
I mean, that's just for this organisation to have some robust discussion around. Is it a priority for us? Is this something that we want to do? Because it's for the long haul. Our project is set for 10 years. And council has the triennium cycle, but we've got funding locked in to the long-term plan till 2028, which is fantastic from our foundation partners. So there is that demonstrable commitment, and then it enables me to go and leverage off central government, philanthropy, and others. So I think that commitment from your foundation organisations is key. Councils have a big part in terms of the public space as well. So it's kind of intimately interwoven. And then partnership with regional council. So we work incredibly closely with regional council. In fact, I've contracted the delivery arm of Predator Free Wellington to regional council. So a lot of technical expertise in that space. And they're they're re-gearing from what I understand. There's now a Kapiti catchment manager, so, having them in the mix as part of early conversations would be a smart move.
So we really need a predator-free Kapiti. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm saying, yeah. If the goal was, hey, this is what we want to do.
Yeah, I totally agree, yeah. Just how we do it, yeah, but it's got to be done, yeah. Thanks.
So thank you, Councillor Coe, for your questions, and thank you, James, for your in-depth views on that. So now I'd actually like to move on to Brendan Owens, who's the Group Manager of Customer and Community, to make some comments from a council perspective. Thank you.
Kia ora, James. We haven't met. I'm the new guy. But I sit on the Pareroho Forest Trust in Beaumont, and I run about 50 trap lines, or 2 trap lines, 50 traps a week.
Nice.
So this sits quite closely with me. But to answer your question, we have got a role in our team set up to start this work.
Yeah.
And so we're hoping to go to market pretty quickly on it. We feel like we have a need or a role to play to set this up. This is very important to our team, eh? So I know there's been a lot of work kind of happening in the background. I know we've supported a few local groups recently, but there is a role. So I think there's a couple of conversations I think we need to have after this just to kind of push through some of that work. So it is. We feel it is part of our role, and we've committed to this role through the RTP to start this coordinated approach across Kapiti.
That's fantastic. And if you take my point around ultimately our success in Wellington relates to what happens further north, we've got a mandate to share our learnings. So, in that capability building space and sharing our data systems, all the things that we had to start from scratch, we don't want to see people reinventing the wheel. So that's a genuine offer when you get that person on board, get them to come and hang out, and we can show them all of our systems and pass them over.
So thank you, Brendan. That's really encouraging to hear for what potentially is going to happen here in Kapiti. Deputy Mayor Kirby.
Thanks, James. I appreciate your presentation. It's quite exciting, actually. My mind was blown a little bit by one person catching 27 rats in their own personal hot water covered pantry. That just, well, okay. I can't even think that would be even possible, but obviously is, so that's amazing. You answered my question because I was going to ask about the obviously intellectual property that you've developed and how easily accessible that is for us if we wanted to go down that road, and you've answered that question with the fact that it's easily available. So that's exciting. I'd be interested to continue this conversation from a wider level beyond this committee as to what we need to be doing across this district, because I know there are already, as you've said, small groups around. Paikakariki's been looking for predator-free for a long time and are working really hard in that space. But we have this situation. I think the challenge for us is we've got lots of townships, different communities separated by rural areas, and it's really hard to manage predator-free across rural things. Urban, I think, almost is somewhat easier because you can go to each household and go like this, and this, and you can space it out because houses pretty much, whereas I think rural one, you've got to get a lot of buy-in from the particular property owners and that kind of thing. So I think we have some unique challenges probably up here in regards to that, but exciting work. Thank you, James. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Councillor Kirby. Excuse me. Councillor Halliday.
Yeah, through you, Madam Chair. Hey, look, this is awesome. Absolutely awesome work. I'm looking forward to seeing how I can lock into it as well. But one question I did have, I noticed your, the brown dots, I think it was, which was your barrier and that sort of stuff. I do wonder, we've sort of got a choke point around by the beginning of Transmission Gully, if you like, and land sort of comes in a little bit. Would just in your perspective, would a substantial step be trying to create a barrier there as well? In other words, cutting off that access way, if you like, that's been created by Transmission Gully, because I've heard you're not the first person that's talked to that being a rodent highway, shall we say, as well, and maybe putting one of those sorts of barriers in that sort of area might help also with regards to the feeding rodents heading that way as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and barriers can take different forms, right? There's obviously hard structure, or there's just density of devices to slow the flow, and nothing, nothing is 100%. That's all around trying to prevent, 90-something 9% animals getting through and then picking up that 1%. But anything that can help you either funnel or hold edges is going to be advantageous, because then you're not getting continuous bleed into your project area or into new areas. So, yeah, definitely.
Lovely, and that's it from me.
So thank you, Councillor Halliday. So we'll just move online to Kirsten Hapata from Otaki.
Tēnā tātou. Oh, kia ora, James. Thank you for the presentation. Very detailed and informative. Yeah, love the work you're doing. Really appreciate that you've got a clear goal. It's long term and it's comprehensive. Ngā Hapu Ōtaki is interested in the work that you're doing and how it could come over to Kapiti. It just complements a whole lot of other things that we're doing and that KCDC is doing. And so, yeah, support the sentiments from the group about bringing it to our area.
Really appreciate those comments, Kirsten. So now we'll move on to Mr. Black.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kia ora, James. Thank you very much for the presentation. I'm very excited about this initiative as well. Yeah, I was just wondering more on the structure and financial side of things. How did you establish or come to the structure that you've got with the trust and the board, and what other expenses besides, we have a supported member looking to be coming through council, but what are the other costs and things to think about going forward?
Yeah, sure. So a company structure just seemed to really suit us in terms of being able to elicit further investment into the project. So we looked at a CCO, council-controlled organisation, and didn't want to have, we needed to sort of decouple slightly from council. We needed that independence. So that's why the structure was chosen. So our team runs at about 34 people. 95% of our budget goes into direct spend on the ground. So that's, we're a ground-based operation. We can't put helicopters up and dump a whole lot of poison, and we wouldn't want to be doing that in any case. So our annual budget runs at about $4 million a year, and that is substantial. But that's a full team of 34 people. 29 of those are field-based, and the others are our analysts. We've got a comms role, myself, and then community coordinator and those sorts of things. Did that answer the question fully?
Brilliant, thank you. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, just needed to know the ballpark of if we're going to set up our own initiative, then what are we actually looking at in the big picture?
Yeah. And what I would say as well is there's the opportunity to bite off smaller chunks. That was a big learning for us. We tried to do Miramar all at once. We couldn't get ahead of breeding, and then we implemented a smaller rolling front approach, and that's been really successful. So you just want to be able to, whatever you bite off, you want to be able to hold the edges to that, and that can be achieved in a multitude of ways. That's
good. And if we link up, because it looks like you're coming around the corner through the city, coming up north, and then you split off into the Wairarapa and up to Kapiti. And the more that we do up here, the less chance of pests actually coming back into your area as well. So it's going to help each other. You've got our back and we got your backs.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you just get, you generate far greater impact in terms of that spread of our threatened and endangered species. Living where we do on Te Horo Beach, it's like, man, that island's not far away. Why aren't there kako around here? And then, you see stoats running past and ferrets squashed on the road, and you go, oh, that's the reason why. It wouldn't take a lot. It'd bounce back pretty quickly.
Agreed. Thanks, James.
Cheers.
So thank you, James. I've got a couple of thoughts and questions as well. So obviously, one of the key messages that you've given us is about coordination. Well, I suppose an overall structure, but also about coordination from the various groups here and how you potentially can move out from there. And I suppose, when you look at this Kapiti coast, we have our barriers of streams and rivers, and I don't know whether they have been used in different places to provide, I suppose, corridors that you could actually start focusing on rather than little, than townships. which
Absolutely. Yeah, no, we work really closely with an organisation called Zero Invasive Predators who are using major river systems in the Perth Valley down in the South Island, southwestland, to hold, do the same thing. So, barrier and buffer systems.
excellent. So, because I suppose the other thing too is that here on the Kapiti Coast we have a lot of rabbits, and from what I understand that the systems that you're using aren't actually designed to catch rabbits. And I know, obviously, if you reduce some of, so it's a case of where so that would have to be a completely different approach how you actually manage those. So KCDC and GW they've had over the last year or so, there's been some massive work done in this area, but it's one of those things that needs to be ongoing as well.
Yeah, it is, and I think that's a really great example for demonstrable success. So where we live, we are individually, all of us landowners are doing our own rabbit control, and it's great. For one night there's no rabbits on our property, and the next night there's rabbits on our property because they're all coming from the neighbours. And so we're, saying to the neighbours, we've got 4 or 5 of us already connected doing it together, and that's far greater impact. And I just think, well, if we can do that with a couple of conversations, then surely we build it out. We've all got stock fences. They can be relatively easily retrofitted with low height rabbit proof fencing, and that's not going to be 100%, but it's going to be a damn sight better at holding a line than doing nothing. So I think, again, where we are, I'm wanting to test this notion of, well, do people really want to collaborate on this? Because you talk to the locals and they will all say that rabbits are a big problem, and rather than doing it all individually and having to do it all of the time, there's a lot to be said for clubbing together, and I don't think it's a huge stretch to get that support.
Yes.
You can bring me back and haul me in front of everyone and tell me I got it wrong in a year's time, but I think it's got legs.
So I have to say, in the area that I live in, that's the number of lifestyle blockers have actually clubbed together, and I think it's been quite effective. But as you said, once you actually remove them from a certain area, the next day, there's the gaps are being filled.
That's where looking at those, barriers, whether it's stock fences and putting wire mesh on them, or looking at topographical, geographical barriers, and kind of using that to draw your margins for your work.
Yes. So I think that's the end of the questions. I really appreciate the time that you've come along, spent today with your presentation. Absolutely fantastic work that you've been doing, and I think it's given us both elected members and staff a lot of food for thought about how we can go forward, with a project here. And I know that we have we have a group here. Unfortunately, I can't ask any questions, I'm sorry. But maybe you could speak to James afterwards. So yes, I appreciate, fantastic. And I wish you all the best for your continued work. And it's so great that you're living in our community, so that, maybe we can, yes. Thank you again. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. And remember, I'm just one small cog in what's become a pretty big machine. So
yes.
happy to share.
So thank you. Okay. So
Do you want to turn your microphone on, Jocelyn, please?
thank you. So now we're moving on to item 7, members' business. And do I have any leaves of absence that people would like to notify me with? No, there are none. Matters of an urgent nature, I haven't been informed of any before the meeting, so now we'll move on to item 8, which is updates, and we don't have any of those. And so now we move on to, actually no, we do have one. 8.1, which is the next steps in the corporate carbon emissions reduction. And so Matthew is going to come and speak to that. Thank you.
So just as Matt comes up, Matt's our advisor sustainability. Recurring theme this morning of sickness and people stepping into the breach, and Matt is one of those. He's stepping in on behalf of Monique, who's had to head north, I think.
So Monique's my manager, so she would be saying. Awesome. Kia ora koutou, ko Matthew toku ingoa. As you said, I'm the new advisor for sustainability here at Council. This is my first time meeting with you, so it's great to meet you all. Please go easy. So yeah, I'm just going to provide you with an update on the next steps in Council's corporate carbon emissions reduction. And the update's going to focus on the work program to set a target for our category 3 to 6 emissions, and also for our work program to start monitoring those emissions. So just to quickly refresh, I think it may have been a while since we presented to you. So Council's emissions have been reported through the Toitu EnviroCare system since 2009, 2010. And we're part of that program because it ensures, we can communicate that any emissions reductions are legitimate and that we are reporting our information correctly. And from time to time, Toitu updates their technical requirements. So back in 2022, Toitu notified Council that we would have to start monitoring our category 3 to 6 emissions, and that we would have to set a target for those emissions by 2025. And so in line with that, in June 29, 2023, Council noted that we must begin data gathering process just to really understand our supplier information. So a lot of these emissions come from our suppliers. And also that we would need to set that target by 2025. So obviously on this path since 2010, Council has been focusing primarily on our category 1 to 2 emissions. This is essentially getting our corporate carbon emissions or getting our house in order. And those category 1 to 2 emissions are anything that Council consumes directly. So it might be petrol, natural gas, refrigerant is captured. And so now, and so you can see there that obviously through time, this graph, it's popped up, and then our wastewater emissions, we were changing how we were processing those emissions. And then 2020, 2021, we had to include our wastewater emissions in our inventory, which meant that, just confused. So got myself confused there, but just wanted to remind Council that when the target was first set back here, Council didn't have to include its wastewater emissions. In 2020, 2021, we had to then include our wastewater emissions. Move on to the next slide. So just to quickly recap on what category 3 to 6 emissions are, because it can be quite confusing. So as I said, we've been focusing on our scope 1 or our category 1 to 2 emissions here. So that's fuel we consume and electricity we use. And this next phase is considering the emissions from the products we use in their life cycle. So that includes the emissions during the construction of the item that we're using, how it's transported to Council and then used, and then how it's disposed. So we capture a small percentage of that in our inventory at the moment, but it's only about 180 tonnes, so it's very, very small at the moment. So crucially, the next part of this project is capturing category 3 to 6 emissions from our suppliers. Our suppliers make up a lot of our emissions. So in line with Toitu's requirements, for the 2022 and 2023 financial year, Council reported the sources of those emissions for the first time. So the way we did this was that my predecessor, Ninka, who used to be the manager for the team, she pulled the financial data from our top 50 emitters. That value, that contract value, is then multiplied by a specific emissions factor, which is just based on the activity. So if you're a road maintenance contract, you produce more emissions. If you're providing IT services, you produce fewer emissions. And then we produce a value. So last year it was estimated at 5,300 tonnes, which is about 35% more than just our category 1 to 2 emissions, and it effectively doubles our overall emissions if we were to include those. Now, obviously, this method is very crude. It's just applying a dollar value to an emissions factor. Depending on how valuable your contracts are, your emissions can go up or down. And so you can just see here that if we apply that figure, our category 3 to 6, onto our other emissions, it more than doubles our total emissions footprint. So the next step in moving from that crude contract value tool to more accurate data is that we need to work with suppliers to understand our broader scope of emissions. And we've started to have conversations. So Monique and I have met with our top 4 suppliers just based on emissions that's using that tool. And those 4 suppliers represent about 70% of our scope 3 to category 3 to 6 emissions, those supplier-based emissions. And so that's your roading contracts, stormwater, and yeah, so just 4, and obviously we did that across 50, so yeah, it's quite a sizable chunk. And what we've found in these initial conversations is that several are actually already capturing their own data, and they also have systems in place where they can actually provide us that data quite easily. We have started receiving some data. It's still in the very early stages, but we have seen there's a lot of opportunity, even just in our initial conversations, that we can help our suppliers use systems they already have so they don't have to reinvent the wheel. They can leverage those systems and just add an emissions factor to, say, their fuel receipting system or even just their energy invoices. So yeah, we've already seen a lot of opportunity, and obviously they're starting to have internal conversations even just after we've spoken to them on how they can change their systems. And so to help support our suppliers, we think a key document could be the development of the Sustainability and Climate Change Guide. This would support our procurement process to make sure that our suppliers understand what data council requires from them, just to make that really clear. And whatever future targets are created, we would add those into that document. Suppliers could see exactly what we need from them, and it would support our existing procurement strategies. You can see this, so Dunedin City Council have actually introduced this at the end of last year. And within that document, they have a series of targets, both hard targets and qualitative targets. And they vary depending on the contract size. So depending on the contract value, the targets and requirements change. And just to quickly, so obviously, as I said, we're in quite an early stage in this process before we can actually set our targets. We do have options around whether those targets are qualitative, so that might mean we require that suppliers over a certain size have to have their emissions verified, like we do with Toitu, or they can be hard targets where, for example, Dunedin City Council requires that their suppliers, that their vehicle emissions drop through time by a certain percentage through time, or even that contracts over a certain value might be required to produce an emissions reduction plan at the beginning of the project and then through to the end. So these are kind of options that we're exploring and considering at the moment. But like I said, we need a lot more data before we can really set these targets. And so next steps. So we've met with our top 4. We will meet with our top 10 in total. So we have another 6 suppliers we'll meet with. Obviously, we're receiving a lot of new data, so we need to consider how we can make our system work with theirs and also create templating options so that it's as easy as possible for our suppliers to provide us with that data. And obviously develop the Sustainability and Climate Change Guide. And also, Council still has other sources of those emissions that we can still continuously add to our inventory. So it might be the emissions from transporting the wood pallets down to the council, from Taupo to here to dry our sludge wastewater treatment plants. Yeah, and next step, prepare the next carbon audit for 23-24 financial year, and then aim to report back to SES on just how we're going on the results of the next audit and on this work program. So yeah, kia ora, thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Matt. It's great to see the work that we're doing in this space. So I now move on to Councillor Coe for any questions or comments.
Thanks for your presentation. Look, I'm just wondering, will there be a transition period once you develop those standards over which, people will need to comply with those, because it, could be a bit of a shock to suddenly have them dumped on them. Secondly, I'm a little bit concerned about the impact on small businesses who may not necessarily be geared up to fully comply with all the standards. And so I would hope there'd be some kind of tiered system, as you talked about, where maybe you just focus on the low-hanging fruit, those top suppliers that produce most of the emissions who are, more able to put all these procedures in place, because it's be quite a massive overhead for a small business, and I'd hate to see small businesses excluded from working with council simply because they can't afford those systems and processes and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. So to the first question, so we've already met with obviously those 4. We are really aware of the fact that if you go too hard, too fast, a lot of, particularly the timeframes, that we really need to work with suppliers even to develop the guide. So Dunedin City Council took 2 years to go back and forth with their suppliers on viable targets that are actually measurable and achievable. So a big focus for them was working continuously with their suppliers, and also with our smaller suppliers, like a lot of other councils have done as well, is that you'd increase expectation as the project value goes up. Yep. So, we might have long-term contracts or just short-term contracts for a one-off project. Depending on the size of that project or the ongoing project cost or contract value, you'd tier the expectation. But, based on even some of our local suppliers we've met with, we want to use their existing systems and help them along the way as much as possible. A lot of them already collect, for example, like I said, their fuel receipts. A lot of them don't actually realise that they can actually use that as a big chunk of their emissions. So for a lot of construction companies, their fuel use in their vehicle fleet is their biggest source of emissions. And a lot of the time, they already collect that information through their invoicing and their fuel card systems. So we want to use those systems as much as possible and work with them along the way. Yeah.
The other question I have is, are there any financial implications for council in terms of our costs rising as a result of introducing these standards, or are there implications for costs for the businesses providing those?
I don't have that analysis at the moment on costs going into. I have heard that in some cases, anecdotally, that some costs can actually reduce using alternative methods to, say, reinforced cement through other, trying to reduce emissions. In some cases, it obviously depend on whatever the project is, but there are other ways to reinforce cement that can actually be cheaper and reduce emissions at the same time. So there are other products, but obviously depending on the product type, and even that's why with the tool we're currently using, obviously that is taking the price of the contract, multiplying it by an emissions factor. As more suppliers start to meet more stringent climate targets, obviously the cost could start to rise. That makes their emissions appear to go up, when in actual fact they're dropping. So that's why the more accurate data we receive, and it gives us an insight into existing systems, how we can make things cheaper and easier. But like I said, we don't have that specific data just yet.
There's something to keep an eye on, though, surely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Unwittingly, have a 20% increase in our costs because we've imposed these standards.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
So thank you. I know that our meeting is going quite long, but I'll allow some quick questions from both Christian and Simon. So off you go, Christian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kia ora and welcome to the table. I just wanted to go over that this committee has had discussions on this area before, and there was a couple of points. I know from my own experience working in this area that there are software systems out there that can automatically interrogate suppliers' accounting software, which does capture all of those things and be able to tag and give emissions factors, say, the supply of steel, concrete, fuel, electricity, and just that can be automated and at very little cost. And then also I would hope that there's lessons to be learned from other folk that do contracting, that if you write the scope of our contracts properly with our suppliers, you should, I would hope, be able to give them the confidence to invest in low carbon technologies, vehicle electrification, equipment electrification, etc., so that they have the confidence and know that they've got the revenue stream coming in to invest in low carbon for themselves as a business for the benefit of them overall, as well as us in reducing our scope 3
Category 3 is scope
well,
3,
yeah, those emissions. So that's all out there. In an appropriate way, I'm
Is there a
happy to talk.
question? Is there a question?
Have you considered all of that?
Yeah, so to the automation system, so yeah, we've spoken with one provider, and they're already looking at taking their it's essentially taking their invoicing system, like you say, and then turning it into a system that just takes that data and spits out a carbon figure. So they're already looking at that, and they're going quite deep into that data. Others are at a different stage. So some are just realizing that that they can use the fuel receipts. So there's varying levels. Some are automating already. In our conversations with them, we've suggested that there are these different options to automate. We're quite aware of that part. And then to the second point, I'm not quite sure how to answer that one. Could you just
maybe take it offline?
Yeah,
Would be good. Thank you.
I'll check in with your manager, so I do it as an elected member in the appropriate way.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Okay.
Thank you. And finally, Mr. Black.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kia ora, Matthew. Welcome to the team.
Thanks.
Now, mine is about there is the cycle of emissions. So I believe that the categories 1 to 6 actually don't take into account the sourcing of raw resources to make products. Just wondering if we actually have a relationship with our partners to make sure, let's say like Tesla sources materials from, third world countries and kind of exploits them a bit. Do we actually understand where our products are coming from?
So this work program is more focused on emissions. So in category 1 to 6, it would consider the emissions of mining the lithium and then transporting it to the manufacturing facility and then just throughout its entire life cycle. Obviously, at the point we're not considering all those emissions. That would speak, I would imagine, to another broader outcome, which is around obviously that social, trying to minimise social harm. So that's something this work program is not focused on. Right. This one is more just focused on trying to capture our 3 to 6 emissions. Obviously, there are other broader outcomes through procurement that might consider social impacts. I couldn't speak to that. I just know that those are they are also considered. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Matthew.
Thank you. So now we move on to Mr. Irons. You have a comment or question?
Oh no, it's just a comment that just to kind of remind, this is a big piece of work that's kind of in progress, and the whole goal is to kind of get to this point later next year, setting some targets. So there's quite a bit of work to do between now and then, and we'll just keep updating SES on the work program as we get close to that crunch point. So we're probably not going to have all the answers today to all these questions, but there is quite a bit of work going on in the background.
So thank you for that, for Brendan. If you look on page 8, you'll see how the next steps are there, and so it'd be really good to keep us up to date with the timeframes particularly. So thank you very much, Matt, for your presentation, and welcome to Council. Hopefully that wasn't too difficult for you. Yes, yeah. So there is a recommendation here on page 8, and that is that we note the update provided in this report. So I'll have a mover for that, Mr. Black, a seconder for that. Thank you, Mr. Judge. Thank you. All those in favour say aye. Motion is passed. Thank you. Right, so now I think we'll just keep going. So now we're going to move on to item 9, and that is considering the climate action grants. So I'll invite Rob to come to talk to us to this paper and the application. So this will be taken as being read. So what we're going to do after Rob has introduced it is that I'm going to ask for a mover and a seconder, and then we're going to move into public excluded time to consider the applications. Thank you, Rob.
Kia ora, everybody. as Madam Chair said, take the report as read, and once we go into PE, I welcome any questions.
So thank you. Before we do that, I'd actually just like to take the opportunity to thank you and the team for putting this report and the applications together and working with the applicants so that we have got a really good set of, I suppose, amount of information so that we can actually make some good decisions. So thank you. Okay, so can I have so on the screen we have the reasons we are going to move into public excluded. So can I have a mover, please? Okay, Councillor Coe, seconder, Mr. Black, thank you. So we'll just turn off the live streaming.